It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreigner Christopher Dickey joins us. How are you, sir?
Always happy to be here.
Always glad to welcome you. Glad to welcome as well Agnes Poirier, UK editor for French News Weekly.
And London-based.
And London-based UK editor.
Sometimes in Paris.
Well, we're glad you stopped in for Marianne, the French News Weekly magazine. Taha Siddiqui, our former Islamabad correspondent, is with us as well. How are you?
Good, good.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
And our Chief International Affairs Editor, Robert Parsons, joins us as well. How are you, sir?
Very well, thanks.
The World This Week. You had to think about it. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. Dueling benefit concerts within shouting distance. A Saturday deadline for moving aid across a border. What could possibly go wrong? Richard Branson sponsoring a concert in the Colombian border town of Cúcuta to raise funds for humanitarian aid. Venezuela's president doesn't want most of those in the crowd, reports our correspondent. Are they themselves Venezuelan?
I then saw an interview with Juan Guaido, who was asking for the world to help, and I decided to pick up the phone and speak with him and see what we could do to help. And he said he felt a wonderful concert, wonderful free concert on the border to illustrate, through music, the importance of letting relief into the country would be wonderful.
Robert Parsons, for those who remember Live Aid in 1984, the concerts for Ethiopia, this is not Live Aid.
No, it's definitely not. God knows where it's going to go. But they're talking about raising an awful lot of money. 250,000 people is the figure for the number of people they say they're trying to gather. I've no idea how many there are there, but you can see those images. It looks huge. And they're trying to raise $100 million for aid to Venezuela if they can get it into the country.
Yeah, 300 meters away, Nicolas Maduro going one better. Not one concert, but two. In the towns of San Antonio del Táchira and Tienditas. Hands off Venezuela is the theme there. Maduro, who's all for humanitarian aid, but not, as he puts it, under the guise of a US-led invasion.
A set of medical supplies is arriving by air, brought through technical cooperation between Venezuela and the Russian Federation.
What do you make of these two concerts, Christopher Dickey?
Oh, I don't know about the concerts. I mean, it's definitely not Live Aid. I just watched Bohemian Rhapsody the other night, and that's all about Live Aid. That's the climax of it. Doesn't look like that. But I think
because with Live Aid, of course, the difference is that back then no one was talking about toppling the Ethiopian government.
No, it wasn't, but also it was done on several concerts all over the world. It was a whole different thing. But what's important here is what the aid is all about. And the question of food and basic sustenance in Venezuela, as the economy has collapsed, has been controlled by Maduro. He gives food to those who support him, and he doesn't give it to those who don't. And so this is an effort to open a channel into Venezuela that will allow Guaido to feed his people.
Yeah.
So that's what really this is about. It's about opening a corridor. The amount of aid that's sitting on the border, for a long time, it was only enough for about 5,000 families for 1 week. This is a country of millions and millions of people who are living below the poverty line. It's not going to make much of a difference. The only thing that's going to make a difference is if they open up a corridor for foreign aid to come in. Yeah. And if they do that, there's a lot of other things that could come in with the foreign aid, and that's what Maduro is talking about.
It was interesting, if I could just add to that as well, Maduro himself is calling it a Trojan horse, and it is precisely that. I have to agree with him. It is a Trojan horse. If that aid goes into the country and the opposition have the control over the distribution of the aid, politically that is massive. Essentially, I think he's probably right.
And they say they're going to do it Saturday.
Yeah, well, let's see what happens on Saturday. But if it does happen, I think it really is the beginning of the end for Maduro.
But it would be funny, this story of two concerts, if it wasn't actually tragic. When you think that Maduro is asking aid from Russia when the neighboring countries are ready to help. Yeah. And we've seen the footage of millions of Venezuelans on foot leaving their country, and it's a catastrophe. So of course we see Richard Branson and the concerts, and we think it's funny, but it is not at all. And the Trojan horse, you're right, and you think the military is still faithful to Maduro, but it could end in carnage. So music, carnage doesn't go well together.
Or not. I mean, I think that's the key question, isn't it? It's the military. If the military starts to slip...
Oh, of course.
And it only takes a few to begin with, and then it gathers momentum. I think clearly that is what the opposition is hoping for. Yeah. And with the whole issue of aid, which, let's face it, the ordinary soldiers are not cut off from the rest of life in Venezuela. They have brothers and sisters, mothers, fathers, grandparents and so on, who are suffering.
But that's been going on for a long time.
It's been going on for a long time. But we've reached a different point now, I think. With the formation of a separate government, with so much international interest in what's going on, and the pressure that's being put on Maduro.
But you are speaking as if all the soldiers' families are suffering as much as everybody else. And in fact, part of the game of Maduro is so that the soldiers' families are not suffering as much as everybody else.
Except that the army is very big. You can't ensure that all the soldiers' families are well off.
No, but one of the problems in Venezuela is that for a long time now, Cuban military intelligence has been helping to organize the army, make sure there's no coup plotting in the army. Yeah. They move people around constantly. They bribe the senior officers by allowing them to participate in the drug trade in a big way.
Absolutely.
There's a whole separate set of
I'm not suggesting this is going to be easier. They're going to get the army to turn.
They do a lot of things to keep the army on board with them. And the Guaido's offer of an amnesty to these largely criminal class of senior officers isn't really going to help, because they're not going to keep their money, and even if they don't go to jail, they won't have the privileges that they have now.
Yeah.
And there's this definite Cold War feel, Taha, Siddiqui, with the superpowers on either side of this battle.
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is basically a proxy war that's being played out.
A proxy war?
Sort of. I mean, there's the U.S., which is backing another group. Then there's Russia, which is backing the other group. And we've seen this happening before in the region. And so it's a continuation of what's been happening. And it's happening not just here. It's connected to the rest of the world. It's happening in multiple places. And, I mean, there are people suffering. There's another. I was just reading up about some reports of violence at the border, even that have just come in. 2
killed this Friday at the border with Brazil.
Yeah, so that's happening too. So I mean, this is
just in line with what you're saying. The alignment of powers is almost exactly the same as it is in Syria.
Yes.
You have basically the United States and Europe poised on one side, and then you have Russia, Iran, and Iran. You have them poised on the other side.
And Turkey.
And Turkey.
Yeah.
But backing who? I mean, in Syria, backing Assad, and in Venezuela, backing Maduro.
Mm. It's 35 days to go until the UK is due to leave the European Union, and some MPs, it seems, have had enough of waiting for a breakthrough. 3 pro-Remain Conservatives taking their seats in the House of Commons alongside the 8 Labour members of Parliament who've had enough of clamouring for a second referendum. From both sides, the accusation that their parties have been hijacked by the extremes.
The right wing, the hardline anti-EU awkward squad that have destroyed every leader for the last 40 years are now running the Conservative Party from top to toe. They are the Conservative Party.
Is that true, Agnes Poirier?
Well, she's got a point.
From top to tail, the hard Brexiters are running.
She knows about it. She just, left. It's been a momentous week in British politics, and finally, somebody has opened the window and let some fresh air coming in. Because it's been very stuffy, almost impossible to breathe in the last 2 years, I can tell you. And I have no idea whether it's going to be for the better, but I can tell you there's a moment of elation on everybody's part, really. And did you see their faces when they took their seats in the opposition on different benches? And, you know, they are former adversaries. And they were so happy. They looked so happy because they first got it off their chest. And what has been going on in the Labour Party with anti-Semitism, among other things, since 2015, since Jeremy Corbyn came to power, is quite something.
Well, before we talk about the anti-Semitism, just is it Britain's Macron moment where, you know, there's this sort of new force that comes out of the centre?
No, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think we should make those comparisons. They called themselves the independent group, which I don't think is very good labelling. Perhaps they wanted to be so vague in order to attract everyone from all sides. But something is happening that might disturb people who like stability, especially in the UK. But it will, you know, be a thing to rejoice for Democrats. And if you can see the level of hatred from Labour ranks, from Tory ranks, against those people, against those 11 magnificent 11, or these 11 dissidents anyway. It's very interesting on social networks that it's vile, but it's because something is happening, and because you can't, as they say, you can't do politics the way they've done it since the referendum. So it doesn't mean they're going to change things with Brexit, but now, you know, they've got more seats than the DUP, who's been a kingmaker or queenmaker. So you know, something is happening.
Robert Parsons. Because if we go over the order, first it was the Labour MPs who quit first earlier this week, and when that happened, people made the comparison with in the early '80s there was a breakaway from the Labour Party, the Social Democrats. It proved short-lived. Yeah, the British parliamentary system doesn't really work that well with sort of splinter groups. But then when those Conservative MPs joined, did that change the equation?
Well, look, I agree with what you were saying. I don't think it's the Macron moment in British politics, but certainly something is changing. And there's no doubt that Brexit is, one way or another, is going to fracture British politics. But we've not quite got to that moment yet. And it's not, at this point, I don't think it's clear how things are going to pan out. At the moment, we've got essentially what looks like a sort of one-issue agreement. The 8 Labour MPs, and there's one more split off today, but not joined the group. And the 3 Tories are there, and they see eye to eye on essentially what should be done, what needs to be done at this moment. But beyond that, there's no ideological cement to bring them together.
Christopher Dickey, is it really a one-issue agreement? Is the dirty little secret not that, well, there just isn't that much of a difference these days between the centre-left and the centre-right?
Well, I think the key word there is center, isn't it? That's exactly what the dissidents are saying, is that the extremes have taken over the parties. I mean, in some ways, it's more conspicuous with Labour than it is with the Tories. I mean, with Corbyn, he really is taking very extreme positions. Before he managed to take over the party, most people would have told you it would be impossible to imagine that Jeremy Corbyn would be the leader of the Labour Party. But he's been successful in holding on to power, but at a tremendous cost in terms of the morale of the Labour Party and in terms of its own credibility with issues like anti-Semitism. But as Agnes says, that's not the only one. And then with the Tories don't know what the hell they want to do. There's this extreme level, and these ex-UKIPers who want to dominate things and say, yes, hard Brexit, whatever, Brexit is their whole raison d'etre. And in fact, most Tories don't feel that way. So there's a lot of room in the middle.
Mm-hmm. The problem I think in the Tory party, you were talking about right at the beginning, is what's going on in the local associations, and that's what the rebellion, I think, from the 3 was essentially about. That the local associations have been taken over by UKIPers and their ilk, and that's what the protest is about. They're saying the Tory party is lost. It's not the Conservative Party that we knew and understood before. It's something completely different now, and we don't want anything to do with it.
It's sort of like the Republican Party in the United States.
well, Taha, Siddiqui, seen from this side of the channel, the UK has always been this sort of place where it's somehow more moderate than many of the countries on the continent. And now we're getting a lot of reports of a lot of nastiness, especially at the local level.
Well, I mean, going back to the whole idea, what we're discussing here, both sides, there are defections. Both sides are seeing sort of like, this people coming out and saying that they're being taken over by the extremists. So in that sense, I mean, there's a lot of read that we're getting is that the British system, in some way, the political system is broken. And a new order is sort of, I think, I mean, definitely it's very factionalized right now, these defections. They're not like, united. But I think we're seeing that with the whole Brexit coming up. And so there is something new happening right now. And that might lead to probably a third party. I don't know. I mean, it's too early to say that.
Of course, there is a third party already. It's called the Liberal Democrats.
Yes, but they are sort of burnt, And also the independent group is not going to make the mistake the SDP did in the early 80s when they did an alliance with the Lib Dems or the Lib Dems of the time. And so, and the Lib Dems have not capitalized at all on their being pro-European. They are the only ones, actually.
Why not?
Well, because they were in a coalition with David Cameron and they lost all credibility then.
And partly because...
And the leader also doesn't have much charisma, sorry.
And partly because the leadership of the Tory party hasn't been interested in reaching out to the other parties at all.
Yeah,
we're seeing May trying to make common ground with the far right of the party rather than trying to go for the centre or beyond, which is one of the complaints that Brussels has constantly made towards May's position. She's failed to find common ground with the other parties.
Yeah, and part of the nastiness that you described, and you talk about it, is the anti-Semitism question. Liverpool Labour MP Luciana Berger, who herself is Jewish, damning in her indictment of the party she's just left.
I cannot remain in a party that I have today come to the sickening conclusion is institutionally anti-Semitic. The leadership has willfully and repeatedly failed to address hatred against Jewish people within its ranks. And it is for these reasons and many more that I have made this decision today. I am leaving behind a culture of bullying, bigotry, and intimidation.
Institutionally anti-Semitic?
Well, she says it and she knows about it. I mean, it's been years now. She needs police protection from her own party, from the young militants, from Momentum. It's the Momentum group, like the militant group in the 80s within the Labour Party. And so, you have to face up to the consequences of your actions. And you just need to go on social networks. You put Luciana Berger and you see what she got, and she's not the only one. Corbyn has failed each time. Of course, he says anti-Semitism is very bad, but in actions, they don't do anything. And actually, there's a commission within Labour to address this issue, and then we discover that nobody is ever going to be punished or being ejected from the party. There's a lot of hypocrisy about it.
We're going to pick up on that point and see how it compares with the resurgence of anti-Semitism in this country when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us, as is Agnes Poirier, UK editor for the French news weekly magazine Marianne. Former Islamabad correspondent for France 24, Taha Siddiqui, is with us as well, as is our chief international affairs editor, Robert Parsons. We were talking just before the break about the anti-Semitism that is felt inside of the Labour Party. France's backlash against anti-Semitism felt Tuesday night at rallies in several cities. In Paris's Place de la République, crowds gathered in the wake of recent anti-Semitic slurs heard at Yellow Vests rallies, conspiracy theories that have gained traction on social media, and a fresh spate of anti-Jewish graffiti in cemeteries. Christopher Dickey, your reaction to those images?
Well, I think it's great, and it's about time. I mean, 25 years ago, there were when you first started to see a new wave of anti-Semitic activities with gravestones being overturned and that sort of thing, there was a huge public revulsion and people came out in the streets and there were these kinds of demonstrations. But over the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of anti-Semitic activity that didn't meet with that kind of reaction. People would say it was deplorable, but you didn't see this kind of outpouring of people. The reason I think you're seeing that now is for two reasons. First of all, people are fed up with anti-Semitism. They don't want it. They don't want it to come back. But they're also fed up with the Yellow Vest movement that's becoming identified with that kind of anti-Semitism. And they're just sick of it. And that is the kind of demonstration that you see in France when there are a lot of people who really care about something. And that's not what you see with the Yellow Vests. With the Yellow Vests, what you see is small demonstrations that get a lot of attention because they're very violent. That's what you've seen with the Yellow Vests again and again. And I think they were drawing, socially, they were drawing a line with that.
Except you were mentioning the Carpentras, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's 29 years ago. I remember very well. I was 17. I was a student. And so a cemetery, Jewish cemetery being desecrated.
In the south of France.
We were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. And the sad thing is that 29 years later, Place de la République, we were 10 times less. We were 20,000. It was wonderful to see that crowd.
Yeah.
But what happened in 29 years is that we are not shocked as we used to be. It's almost as if anti-Semitism has been trivialized. Why? Because the extreme right and extreme left being, you know, a source of anti-Semitism today, or anti-Zionism, as they would call it, have converged and have become, you know, ubiquitous. They are a force they are the only opposition really to Macron, and we almost got used to it, and that's really dangerous because, you know, we can always look at the figures. You know, an increase of 74% of anti-Semitic acts this year. Actually, if you look at 10 years, it's not such an increase. It's far too many. But what is worse is in the spirit, in the mind. We have got used to anti-Semitism, and it's awful.
It's banalisé, huh?
Taha, Siddiqui.
Yeah, I would just like to add that, you know, when we talk about the political system out there, but I mean, one of the biggest reasons why this is on the rise, I feel, is because what you were saying earlier was the social media aspect. And the way, I mean, mostly news is shared now between, you know, horizontal networks of Facebook, Twitter, where people are seeing this echo chamber. And because of that, it's increasing. And I mean, there's a lot of talk around this that I've been focusing and seeing on is how to control those kind of information networks which are promoting this. And that's why perhaps, you know, what 29 years ago, there was more support for it. Now there's this, and that needs to be really, I mean, these social media platforms are where this is coming from mainly. I feel so.
It's not just in France, I should say, as well.
Yeah.
This is a phenomenon we've seen pretty much throughout Europe. In Germany, the rise in anti-Semitic acts has been considerably higher even than in France. And in Eastern Europe, Hungary in particular, we see very much the same sort of thing going on.
Well, there's also a complicating factor when we talk about anti-Zionism and the way all that plays into it. You have a situation, for instance, in the United States, where the President of the United States may have a Jewish son-in-law and he may be the best buddy of Bibi Netanyahu, and yet on the other side of his political life, he's encouraging all kinds of bigotry, including anti-Semitism, violent anti-Semitism.
When he tweets against George Soros?
When he tweets against George Soros, when he basically sucks up to all the crypto-fascists around the world and embraces them, basically he's endorsing anti-Semitism. So that creates a more confused kind of environment. And also it has to be said that Bibi Netanyahu has not done anybody any favors on this.
Yeah.
He's now in bed with the Kahanists. You know, with a radical, extreme racist party.
Which brings us to the question. There was the day after in the days that followed last weekend, there was an incident where a French Jewish intellectual was harangued on the sidelines of a Yellow Vest protest, and the man didn't said "you Zionist." He didn't say "you Jew," and the hashtag anti-Zionism trended above the hashtag anti-Semitism. So is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism?
Well, the question is, anti-Zionism often is anti-Semitism. It's not always anti-Semitism.
On the extreme left.
Macron had hit the hammer right on the head with that, I think. He said that people are hiding behind anti-Zionism when what they really mean is anti-Semitism. That's what they're really talking about.
But should you be allowed to criticize Israel and to say, and even to call for a boycott on the grounds that...
Absolutely, yeah. Well, yeah, I don't have any problem with that, but it's a different thing when you're using it as a label with a racial content.
Although I don't think we should legislate. I mean, anti-Semitism is an offence in France, not an opinion. It's an offence. Yeah. Now, anti-Zionism shouldn't be made an offence. We all know what's behind it. And actually, you say R.I.P Finkielkraut, the French philosopher, was not called a dirty Jew. I heard it I heard it quite well.
The one man's outburst, the one who's been arrested, he didn't say it.
No, he didn't. But we all know now that he's a Salafist. And I mean, anti-Zionism is the anti-Semitism of the extreme left, and we have, of course, that there's a convergence between the two extremes. That makes it completely explosive. Also, the new thing is that people used to be ashamed of being anti-Semitic, and today with the social networks, because a lot of them hide behind anonymity, they just say awful things they wouldn't actually say before. There was a time when people thought before they spoke, but social networks, you don't need to think.
All right. Well, the other question we've been asking this week is, how far will it go between India and Pakistan? A week after the worst ever suicide attack in Indian-administered Kashmir left 40 paramilitary forces dead in that border region, the border at crossing points like the Pakistani town of Wagah remain shut. India's prime minister has vowed to, quote, avenge every tear. He squarely blames Islamabad for the attack claimed by Islamic radical group Jaish-e-Mohammed. Taha, Siddiqui, how far will it go?
Well, earlier today there was a press conference by the military spokesperson on the Pakistani side, and this was the main topic of the press conference. He wanted to talk about this terror attack and what's going on, and they did mention the fact that there is seemingly some sort of a build-up. But we've seen that before too. At the same time, Pakistan government has ordered a crackdown against Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is the group that has been accused of carrying out this attack. So that has happened, that they've taken over their seminaries, their offices in Pakistan.
But and I gotta interrupt you there. Who's giving the orders? Because earlier we had statements earlier in the week from the Prime Minister Imran Khan, and we were talking about with Rob Parsons earlier this week. You had the impression, well, is he the one who actually is the one who's capable or not of cracking down on a group like Jaish-e-Mohammed?
I mean, the thing is, basically, there was a national security meeting yesterday. After that, the Prime Minister issued an order, and they followed procedure in it and protocol, but the decisions are made at the military aspect. But what I'm trying to say is that even if this decision or this measure is happening right now, it's very cosmetic, and it's something that we've seen before.
Cosmetic.
Yeah, we've seen that before, like, with the Jamaat-ud-Dawa after the Mumbai attacks. We saw the similar sort of moves by the Pakistani government. First, denial, which we saw earlier in the week. Then it goes to some kind of action, which we're seeing right now. And then it goes back to normal, and then there's another attack. So it gets repeated because Pakistan military does not really want to give up on these proxies. It has an incentive to show that it's giving up.
But yeah, I could make the argument that they have an incentive to crack down on those proxies as well, as you call them.
Well, I mean, basically, it's complicated, but the Pakistan military sort of, dwells in the war economy in the region. And this war economy is what keeps it dominant domestically in the region. And historically, we've seen the Pakistan militaries rule Pakistan. So in that sense, they have an incentive to keep these proxies rather than dismantle them.
All right, an unlikely mediator emerged through it all. A long-scheduled tour by the Saudi crown prince had the same Mohammed bin Salman who's accused over the war in Yemen, a crackdown at home, the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, raining billions in investment pledges on both Pakistan and India. MBS enjoys good relations with both and tried to play peacemaker.
Extremism and terrorism are a common concern of ours. I want to say that we will cooperate with India in every way, notably by sharing intelligence. Not only India, but every country nearby. We will work with everyone.
Extremism and terrorism is our common concern, he says, Christopher Dickey.
You know, look, different world leaders, especially when they're in trouble one way or another, love to present themselves as peacemakers, people who are going to find a solution. He's not going to find any solution to India and Pakistan. He gets treated royally, as it were, while he's touring around, and he hands out lots and lots of money. And he hopes that the world will forget about bone saws and chopping up Jamal Khashoggi and disappearing his body and starting a war in Yemen and killing and starving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people there, and so on and on and on. This was much more about Mohammed bin Salman trying to recover some kind of credible international reputation than it was about making peace between Pakistan and India.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, additionally, of course, Saudi Arabia would rather there isn't a conflict between India and Pakistan. It would rather that India and Pakistan spent their money buying Saudi oil than fighting each other. There's that element to it too. But I think essentially this is Mohammed bin Salman trying to present a new image to the world, and this is a very convenient moment for him.
And what's dangerous, perhaps, in all of this is the fact, Robert, that it's campaign time in India right now.
Yeah, it's always dangerous when moments like these coincide with political concentration points, you know, for a country. We've seen with Modi in India that he's in the past he's tried to use politics in international affairs. You know, he's used quite strong language with Pakistan, threatening a crack on the jaw of Pakistan in the last 24 hours. Quite what he means by that, we don't really know at the moment. Does he mean a military crack on the jaw, or another suggestion that seems to be coming from India is diverting waters from Pakistan to starve Pakistani agriculture? Is that what he's planning? The problem is for him, I think he's put himself in a position now where he has to show that he's doing something, that he's not just an empty...
With the water aspect, I mean, I was reading up on it, and we've seen this happening in 2016 and before also. I mean, India cannot really, they've threatened definitely, but India cannot divert the water because it does not have the capacity to store it. It'll flood its own side. So it's very rhetorical right now for Modi to say that. I mean, he has to pander to the locals because of the elections, of course. So he has to show some action. But last time around, when the Uri attack happened in 2016, they did a surgical strike, in which they claimed an exaggerated version of it.
Quite how surgical.
Yeah, it wasn't at the grand scale that they did say that, but there are reports that I have someone who also went and found out that they did cross over and they did take out jihadi camps on the other side on the line of control.
Taha, and I wonder what your opinion is on this. The problem for Modi at the moment is he's talking himself up so much just before an election. One suspects he's got to do something.
Of course, no, because, I mean, you know, he was right before this. I was talking to some Indian journalists also, and they're telling me right before this, there was a chance, you know, BJP and then with Congress, it was neck to neck. It was going with the elections. And I mean, BJP had lost a lot of reputation. So this is bringing him back into the game because he has to look stronger. But whether or not he will go through something, because, I mean, you know, it's very complicated between India and Pakistan. And we've seen the last, let's say 8, 9 years or 10 years, it's been a lot of rhetoric. And then, but I mean, 2016, we saw that surgical strike. But on the other side, on Pakistan, the Pakistani military said nothing happened. And then they flew the journalists to a place and they said, look, nothing happened. And even though something happened somewhere else, but it's all, I mean, you know, it's also such a war of narratives on both sides. That's what I see it as.
Part of the war playing out in how it's spun. We're not quite sure he was 85. He was a bit guarded about his age. Milan Fashion Week and his Fendi brand among those, paying tribute to Karl Lagerfeld, who passed away this week. The German designer, best known as the man who shook up Chanel when he took over in 1983. It wasn't just his style. Every Karl Lagerfeld show was an event unto itself, like the time he had a miniature space shuttle take off at Paris's Grand Palais.
I cannot show old clothes in an old setting. That would be too much. The setting is something what is existing in France, but the clothes have to be clothes of today, with background of tradition, but with proportions of something new.
Agnes Poirier, how will Karl Lagerfeld be remembered?
I think as the last one of his kind, that is to say, it's really the end of a generation. You know, they had... He couldn't care less being judge. Apparently, he never apologized, even when he should have. And he was an erudite. I mean, if you look at his book collections, his personal library, and he was so curious about the world. You know, he lived in the present, and there was nothing that didn't interest him. And you can see, and he never gave a dull interview. I mean, and also we all remember, as we just saw, his clipped, French with his German accent, and he was, was listening to a book sometimes with, collision of different time, and he was actually a creation. He was his best creation, and he was more than all the labels he created or represented. It was Karl Lagerfeld. Very often, although he was, of course, associated with Chanel, which he completely revived, it was, more than Chanel.
Yeah, as Agnes was saying, he was a journalist's dream. He said Coco Chanel would have hated what I do. He said at one point, sweatpants are a sign of defeat. You lost control of your life, so you bought some sweatpants.
I love that. That's why he was so great. I mean, he did give great interviews. He spoke very well, always with that German accent. He was a wonderfully eccentric, physically very eccentric. He always looked like nobody else quite looked.
Yeah.
And he designed beautiful clothes. He was a great, great designer. But I think Agnes is also right that, and my wife and I were talking about this, it really did feel like the passing of a whole generation, the end of a whole era when he died. All the great designers we might have talked about in the 70s and 80s, they're all basically gone now. And the only one who has that kind of stature probably and sort of overlapped with generations is Gautier. But for the rest, Yves Saint Laurent, all of the names we would have talked about in the old days, Givenchy, all of them, they're all gone.
And the only one, at least for me, who's instantly recognizable. I found myself in Galignani on Rue Rivoli one day, and there he was standing next to me, and it's quite clearly him.
Oh, well, there's a store on my street that has children's clothes by Lagerfeld. And they had out after he died, they had all these little Lagerfeld models out. They were all these iconic things.
And one final point on this, there's the question of whether Choupette the cat will really inherit. Choupette and her 262,000 Instagram followers indeed in mourning. Taha, Siddiqui, what do you make of Choupette?
Yeah, I was reading up on that. Yes, I mean,
careful what you say here.
Yeah, but this sort of tells you. I mean, it was the cat has a lot of followers on Instagram and on Twitter, and I was like, I mean, that's more than a lot of serious people that I know on.
It's more than me.
This is a cat. So I mean. This is going to be an inheritance apparently, and the person that's going to manage the cat is going to be well taken care of.
All right, we'll unfortunately we'll have to leave it with Choupette. I want to thank you, Taha, Siddiqui. I want to thank as well Christopher Dickey, Robert Parsons, Agnes Poirier. Stay with us, please. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Simon Harding, whose attention is squarely on that Colombia-Venezuela border.
Absolutely, François. Good evening, everyone. Taking you back to a more serious topic, of course, everyone's been talking about the situation in Venezuela, and it's really creating a lot of buzz because it's just ongoing at the moment, François, of course, with the concerts just in the offing a few minutes ago. But, of course, it's been garnering international attention throughout the day. The headline in the Miami Herald, just to start us off, the latest, 1 woman killed, a dozen injured in Venezuela. The focus very much on...
that's at the border with Brazil, right?
Correct.
Where our correspondent says is actually the death toll has climbed to 2.
So just an improvement then, or an improvement, a change from the article that I just put on. But again, it's just, I think it's shocked so many people that it's really, that the fact has escalated in such violence, the fact that it's been people who have had the aid, who are trying to get aid into the country, who are being targeted this much. We can see here the barrage of police and soldiers trying to stop people coming in to get that aid. If we move on, we have a tweet here from a gentleman saying, National Guard shooting the people of Venezuela who are demanding freedom and humanitarian aid. Only a freedom military force will be able to stop Maduro's narco regime. So I think hinting to the fact that there needs to be an external kind of UN peacekeeping force there in operation to try and stop the violence at the border. And of course, as I was saying, the concert, which is really the focus is really shifting on that, is actually the #1 trending story on Twitter as we speak. France 24, we've been having that coverage on that amongst others. You can have here the Venezuela Aid Live, which is of course in favour of Juan Guaido, shall we say, whereas the hands-off Venezuela is more in favour of the Nicolas Maduro regime. We've got a tweet here from Richard Branson, of course, who's spearheading that Venezuela Aid Live, says, let's get this party started, watch the concert from anywhere in the world. And I think essentially what's surreal and what people are really surprised about is how close they are. Just 300 metres separates both concerts on either side of the border, the Venezuela Aid Live, of course, in Colombia, and the hands-off Venezuela just on the other side near the town of Chinditas. You can see it on this map, how close it is.
Wow.
You've got a close-up of the bridge, and then here on the right-hand side, you can see where the pro-Maduro concert, shall we say, is being held, and then this aerial picture just here showing really how close it is. There's also the role of the United States, which has been highlighted. David Korn here, who's an American journalist, and who talks about how this situation, amongst other, theories, has been fabricated by the US, of course, who have imposed sanctions on Venezuela, who haven't been able to use that money to distribute food rations to their own citizens, and how now they might be benefiting from this whole situation. So a vicious circle going around. And of course, recently we've been focusing a lot on the fact that, medical aid's not reaching people. There's a lot of problems. But looking forwards, this has been very much focused on just Venezuela. But The Guardian today coming out with an article saying that the crisis threatens to spread disease epidemic across the continent. So really the magnitude and the scale of what's going on, if no aid, if no resources reach Venezuela, really put in sharp relief.
So you have this story trending, and you also have the story of this US actor from the series Empire.
Yes, Jussie Smollett, who's really turned the whole story on his head. Of course, he went to court to face allegations that he spread false accusations of the hoax that he was attacked. The judge, as the BBC have headlined here, calling it a despicable act from him. It's obviously made headlines in the United States. USA Today, Jussie Smollett suspended from Empire, so he's actually been pulled from that show after prosecutors said he'd faked it. And again, there's been a lot of reactions, negative reactions, as you can imagine. Here, according to Chicago PD, Larry Elder really taking a poke at him, saying, have you never heard of an agent? So there's a lot of negative attention going towards him.
All right, many thanks for that, Simon Harding. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.